When Grace first arrived at the Johnsons' gate, nobody could believe she was just a maid. She was tall, slim, and very beautiful. Her smile could melt a stone. Madam Johnson almost shouted, "Ah, God has answered my prayer." She believed she had finally found the perfect house help. Grace greeted politely, kneeling slightly. "Good evening, Ma." Her voice was soft and respectful. From that moment, Madam Johnson liked her. The Johnsons were a wealthy family living in Lagos. Mr. Johnson was a businessman who traveled often, and Madam Johnson was a school proprietor. They had 3 children, David, Chidera, and baby Daniel. The house was big, and they needed someone to help with chores and watch the kids. That was why Grace was hired. At first, Grace behaved like an angel. She swept the compound, cooked tasty meals, and played with the children. She even helped Madam Johnson in the kitchen, singing gospel songs while working. Neighbors admired her and said, "This woman is lucky-o. Her maid is like family." But behind that innocent face was a dangerous secret. Before Grace came to the Johnsons, she already had HIV. But instead of seeking treatment, bitterness filled her heart. She felt cheated by life and swore that no child would enjoy happiness if she could help it. Her plan was simple. She would slowly destroy the children one by one. One evening, the Johnsons went out for a family friends party. Grace was left alone with the children. She entered the kitchen quietly, took a razor blade, and cut herself lightly. Drops of her blood fell into the baby's pap. Innocent baby Daniel ate the food, smiling at her. Grace smiled back, but it was not the smile of love. It was the smile of evil. Within weeks, Daniel started coughing and running high temperature. Madam Johnson rushed him to the hospital. The doctors tried their best, but the sickness had no clear cause. Grace was always by Madam's side, saying, "God will heal this child, Ma. Don't worry." Nobody suspected her. Daniel's condition worsened. Madam Johnson cried every night, begging God to spare her baby. Grace would carry the child sometimes, rocking him and pretending to be sad. But deep down, she was satisfied. Her wicked plan was working. After months of struggle, Daniel died. The house became quiet like a graveyard. Madam Johnson collapsed in tears, and Mr. Johnson was broken. Neighbors gathered to console them. Grace too knelt down, crying fake tears. "Ah, my little brother is gone." Everyone believed her. Nobody could imagine she was the cause. The family tried to move on. They still had David and Chidera, their older children. Mr. Johnson encouraged his wife, "We must stay strong. God knows best." Madam Johnson nodded, but her heart was heavy. Grace continued her pretense, working even harder to win their trust. Chidera was full of life, a playful girl who loved to dance and sing. Grace didn't like her laughter. One afternoon when the parents went out, she repeated her evil act. She mixed her blood into Chidera's food. The little girl ate it innocently. Days later, she started coughing just like Daniel. People began to whisper, "How can one family lose a child, and another one is falling sick again?" Some said it was spiritual attack. Some suggested the Johnsons should do deliverance. Madam Johnson became restless, but she still trusted Grace with her children. After long weeks of hospital visits, little Chidera also died. Madam Johnson almost ran mad. She screamed at the burial ground, "God, why me?" Mr. Johnson held her, crying silently. This was their second child gone. Grace pretended to faint at the funeral, making people believe she loved the children so much. Only David remained. He was about 10 years old and smart. He noticed things. He had seen Grace hiding in the kitchen sometimes, and he felt something was wrong. One day she forced him to eat food he didn't want. He refused and hid the food. Grace became angry and beat him. David didn't tell his mother, but in his heart, he knew Grace was not as good as she pretended. One evening, Madam Johnson returned earlier than expected. She met Grace shouting and shaking David. Madam was shocked. "Grace, is this how you treat my son?" Grace quickly knelt down, crying fake tears. "No, Ma, I was only trying to make him eat. I didn't mean harm." Madam forgave her, but a small doubt entered her heart. Mr. Johnson, too, began to suspect. He noticed that all the sicknesses started under Grace's watch. But each time he spoke, Madam would defend Grace, saying, "No, oh, Grace is like my sister. She cannot harm us." Still, David's eyes told another story. Fear was written all over his face whenever Grace entered the room. The truth was close to coming out, but Grace was not done yet. David was no ordinary boy. He was quiet, observant, and clever. After seeing the way Grace handled his late siblings, he began to write down strange things in a small notebook. How Grace shouted, what she cooked, and when the sickness started. It was his secret diary. One afternoon, Madam Johnson went for a meeting, leaving Grace with David. He refused to eat the beans she cooked. Grace slapped him hard. "Stubborn boy, eat it now," she shouted. David cried, but didn't touch the food. Later, he wrote in his notebook, "She wanted me to eat beans. I refused. She beat me." That night, Madam Johnson noticed marks on David's arms. "What happened to you?" she asked. David kept quiet. Grace quickly interrupted. "Ah, Ma, he was playing football in the compound. He fell." Madam believed her. Grace smiled secretly, knowing how to twist the truth. David once sneaked into the kitchen and saw Grace cutting herself with a blade. She allowed drops of blood to fall into the soup. His heart almost stopped. He ran back to his room and wrote it down in his notebook. She put blood in the soup. That evening, when the family ate, David pretended to eat, but secretly spat the food into a tissue. He was scared to talk, but deep inside, he knew he had to protect himself. Grace, meanwhile, was watching him closely. She suspected he was beginning to know too much. The neighbors were beginning to talk. "That maid is too fine for housegirl work," one woman said. Another added, "2 children gone in 1 year? Something is not normal." But to outsiders, Grace still appeared perfect, beautiful, humble, prayerful. Mr. Johnson could not sleep. He remembered that Grace was the one always with the children when they fell sick. He decided to start observing her closely. One day, he returned home early from work and found her quickly hiding something in the kitchen. She froze when she saw him. "What are you hiding?" Mr. Johnson asked. Grace smiled innocently, showing him onions in her hand. "Nothing, sir. I was only cutting onions." Mr. Johnson stared at her, suspicious, but said nothing. That night, Grace entered David's room. She bent close and whispered, "If you ever tell your parents what you saw in the kitchen, you will join your brother and sister in the grave." David shook with fear. He couldn't sleep. The next day, David wrote everything down again in his notebook. He even drew a small picture of Grace with a blade. He decided that one day he would show it to his father. Madam Johnson began to notice that David was withdrawing. He no longer played freely. He jumped whenever Grace entered the room. "Is everything all right, my son?" she asked. David wanted to speak but remembered Grace's threat. He only nodded. Mr. Johnson finally told his wife, "I don't trust this maid again. Something is not right." Madam defended Grace, saying, "Don't say that. This girl is like a daughter to me." Mr. Johnson shook his head. He decided to act secretly. Without telling anyone, Mr. Johnson installed a small hidden camera in the kitchen and another one in the sitting room. He didn't want to believe his suspicion, but he needed proof. One evening, while the parents were away, Grace entered the kitchen. She took her blade again, cut her finger, and allowed the blood to drop into a pot of stew. She stirred it, smiling wickedly. She didn't know the camera was recording everything. Later that night, Mr. Johnson checked the footage secretly. His hands shook as he saw Grace cutting herself into the food. His heart broke. "Oh God, what have we allowed into our home?" he whispered. He knew his children were never safe again. Mr. Johnson couldn't believe his eyes as he replayed the recording. Each time Grace dropped blood into the pot, his stomach turned. He felt sick, but also guilty. How many times has she done this? Did she kill my children with this same wickedness? His hands trembled as he closed the laptop. He wanted to rush and tell Madam Johnson immediately, but he stopped himself. If I speak without evidence she can see with her eyes, she won't believe me. He decided to wait and gather more proof. Meanwhile, David finally gathered courage one evening and handed his small notebook to his father. "Daddy, please read it. Don't tell her I showed you." Mr. Johnson opened it and saw all the dates, drawings, and notes. He broke down in tears. "My son, you've been carrying this alone?" David nodded silently. Mr. Johnson tried to show his wife the notebook, but she refused. "I won't allow you to spoil this girl's name. Grace has been like a daughter to me." She hugged Grace in front of everyone. Grace smiled, but in her heart she laughed at Madam's blindness. Grace wasn't done. One evening she forced David to eat yam porridge. David pretended to eat but hid the food under his bed in a nylon bag. Later he gave it to his father. Mr. Johnson sent it to the hospital lab secretly. Days later, the result came back. There was blood contamination in the food. Mr. Johnson almost fainted. Now he had hard evidence. He decided it was time to act. He told his wife he would travel, but instead he stayed around secretly. That night, Madam also went for a women's vigil. Grace was left with David. As usual, she entered the kitchen, cut herself, and dropped blood into the stew. This time, Mr. Johnson was watching from another room through the live feed. He recorded it on his phone as well. His chest was beating fast. He knew tonight was the night to end it all. He burst into the kitchen suddenly. "Grace, what are you doing?" Grace jumped, shocked, the spoon falling from her hand. "Sir, I was only cooking," she stammered. The blood-stained blade was still on the counter. At that exact time, Madam Johnson came back from vigil. She entered the kitchen and saw the scene. Her eyes widened. "Grace, what is this?" Mr. Johnson played the video in front of her. Grace froze. Madam screamed and almost collapsed. Seeing she was exposed, Grace dropped her fake tears. Her face hardened. "Yes, I did it. I gave your children my blood, and I will not stop until I finish this boy." She pointed at David. Madam shouted and held her son tightly. Mr. Johnson raised alarm. Within minutes, neighbors rushed in. When they heard what Grace had been doing, some women screamed. Others shouted curses. One man almost slapped her, but Mr. Johnson held him back. "Let the police handle this." The police were called. Grace tried to run but was caught. As they handcuffed her, she shouted bitterly, "Children of rich people, you will suffer the way I suffered. Beauty gave me nothing but pain. I will not die alone." After the police took her away, Madam Johnson collapsed in tears. She cried uncontrollably. So it was true. Grace killed my babies, and I called her my daughter. Mr. Johnson hugged her, but he too wept. David clung to his parents, shaking with fear. That night was the longest of their lives. They sat together in the living room, watching David sleep. Madam whispered, "Never again will I leave my child in the hands of a stranger without listening to him." Mr. Johnson held her hand firmly. They knew life would never be the same again. The case went to court. The whole community gathered to hear the shocking story of the maid who poisoned her madam's children. Grace stood in the dock, still beautiful, but now looking hardened. When the judge asked if she was guilty, she shouted, "Yes, I did it. I wanted them to feel pain like me. Rich people think life is easy." The courtroom gasped. The judge shook his head sadly. "What you did is wickedness of the highest order. You killed innocent children who trusted you. You will spend the rest of your life in prison." Grace laughed bitterly as the warders dragged her away. For the first time, she looked ugly. Her beauty couldn't hide her evil anymore. Back home, Madam Johnson wept for days. She stayed in her children's room, hugging their clothes. "My babies are gone because I trusted a stranger more than my own child," she cried. Neighbors came to console her, but only time could heal her heart. Mr. Johnson became even closer to David. One evening he knelt beside him and said, My son, I promise to always listen to you. You saved this family. If not for your notebook, we would never have known the truth. David hugged his father tightly. Months later, the Johnsons slowly began to smile again. They visited the graves of Daniel and Chidera, placing flowers and praying for peace. Madam Johnson whispered, "Rest well, my angels. We will never forget you." As they walked back, David held his parents' hands. Though scars remained, the family chose hope. They had survived evil, and they had each other. Moral of the story: not everyone who looks like an angel has the heart of one. Parents, listen to your children. Protect them, for danger can wear a beautiful smile. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more. Thank you, and stay safe.